Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Every touch is a step forward. By Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. And by Real Good Foods. Real food you feel good about eating.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, a busy time coming up for my guest, a 100-mile bike ride through Death Valley next week, and then the New York City Marathon 2 weeks later. But Erik Douds says these events take on a new, unexpected layer when you have type 1.
You realize, yes, it's about the ride, but it's almost so much more about like the people that you're talking to while you're out there, but then also hanging around the pool and just hearing other people's stories. And that's what's magical. It's just the community coming together and experiencing something like that. You get to share your war stories, but you also get to share your celebrations.
We'll talk more about that community. And Erik is doing the JDRF Death Valley Ride with Scott Johnson. We'll talk about how the popular community leader got involved. Plus, tell me something good. Great info about new blogs and scholarships. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of Diabetes Connections. I'm your host, Stacey Sims. We aim to educate and inspire about type 1 diabetes by sharing stories of connection. I want to tell you right off the bat here, I am not recording in my studio. You can probably hear a little bit of a difference. I'm hoping it's not too echoey. I am in a hotel room in Atlanta. Yeah, I'm here for the She Podcasts conference. It is the first ever podcasting conference just for women. And I'm speaking and presenting and listening a lot. I'm thrilled to be here. But the way life went, I was kind of hoping to record this at home before I headed out of town, but it just didn't happen. So I really should take a picture and post this. I am in a hotel room at your standard hotel desk, but it sounded really hollow. So I threw some pillows up. They're propped up by my computer. It looks absolutely ridiculous. I think it helps the sound a little bit. We shall see. But yeah, a little bit on the excitement in my house before I left, which kept me from recording at home. Benny is fine, but he hurt himself, of course, with wrestling. And we finally got the blood sugars under control, kind of, as best we're doing with the wrestling practices. But he hurt his knee. And I won't go into the whole long story, but initially we thought it might be a ligament tear, an MCL tear, which would have put him out of commission for a long time. And so, we were worried about that. But he is doing great. He just has like a knee strain. There's a femoral patella-femoral. There's a technical term for it that I'm sure some of you know. It's a very common injury, and it's just rest, ice, elevation, that kind of thing. So he'll be okay. But I have to tell you, I took him to the ER because when it happened, he was in so much pain. I mean, he couldn't walk. And then, of course, I thought maybe it is a tear. Who knows? But his blood sugar immediately, skyrocketed. And I'm in the ER with him thinking, oh my gosh, they're going to think I'm literally the worst diabetes mom. What are they going to talk to us about? They didn't check blood sugar. They didn't ask about it. They did say, oh, I see an insulin pump. He's got type 1. And the nurse was great. She's like, do you have this? And I'm like, I got it. If we need to figure it out later, I'll talk to you more, but we got it for now. So they didn't ask me anything out of the ordinary. They didn't check. I was a little disconcerted that they didn't ask at all, just what if it did come into play, or what if we really, I don't know, we needed some help of some kind, but we didn't, and he was fine. But oh my gosh, I'm so glad they didn't check. I mean, it wasn't just, 250. It was, high, right? It just said high on the Dexcom. Of course, we got him down once he was not in so much pain and things were less crazy. All right, with that excitement, we also have the excitement of the world's worst diabetes mom with my book. The pre-orders, oh my gosh, they are going out this week. So if you have already ordered the book through the website, and as I say, already ordered, this is, I'm taping on Friday, October 11th. Your copy should be going out the week of the 14th. You can still pre-purchase at the website at diabetes-connections.com. The book goes up on Amazon on November 3rd, including the ebook. The audiobook will follow closely behind. It may be ready on the 3rd, but I'm trying not to say it will be because we're a little delayed in the recording. That's my fault. Well, that's bronchitis fault. I had bronchitis. So we were delayed about a week and a half because you don't want me reading the book like that. So I will let you know when it's out there for sure. There should also be some reviews coming out soon in diabetes media, and I'm flipping out because I really hope people like this, of course. I think it's going to be well received, but you never really know. So if you did get a pre-order, if you're getting your copy, if you could just post a review on Amazon once it goes live, or even just share on Facebook or share with your friends that you know in the diabetes community. If you didn't love it, that's okay. Share what you think honestly. I would love to hear those honest reviews. If you love it, tell everybody, of course. Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. We started with Dexcom back in the olden days before Share. So trust me when I say using the Share and Follow apps makes a big difference. Benny and I set parameters about when I'm going to call him, how long to wait, that kind of stuff. It really helps us talk and worry about diabetes less. And if he's at a sleepover or away on a trip, it gives me so much peace of mind. It also helps if I need to troubleshoot with him because we can see what's been happening over the last 24 hours and not just at one moment. The alerts and alarms that we set also help us keep the highs from getting too high, except when he messes up his knee at wrestling practice, and also help us jump on the lows before they're a big issue. Internet connectivity is required to access the separate Dexcom Follow app. To learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. My guest this week is global traveler and endurance athlete Erik Douds. Diagnosed as a teenager, he took diabetes on as a challenge, and he'll explain more about that. But oh my gosh, talk about a challenge. November 1st, Erik is going to run the New York City Marathon. But before that, he's going to do the 100-mile JDRF Death Valley bike ride, right? Why not? He is partnering on that ride with Scott Johnson, well-known blogger, community leader, Diet Coke lover, and all-around good guy. Scott's been training hard, but he has been having some issues. He's been posting videos about the training, and here's a snippet from one of them.
All right, you guys, I have a total, bad news, good news thing going on here. So, I've been trying to get this long weekend ride in successfully for the past 3 weeks. First week that I tried it, I hit the wall. Second week, I broke 2 spokes and then found what's called a goat head in my front tire, flat tire. And at that point, I was like, FTS, I'm done. Take me home. Called for a ride. And this week, I'm out making another attempt, and I'm like, all right, I feel good. I'm aiming for 50 miles. I hit mile 40, and like the last leg, I'm feeling good. Let's do it. I hear a boing and feel the back of my bike kind of wobble a little bit. Pull over to check things out, and another different spoke broke. It's really it's just not a good thing. So I stopped, kind of assessed the situation, and I called for another ride. I'm just gonna wait it out here. Good news is, holy cow, look where I am.
Look where he is. He is at the beach. He's at the beach, a beautiful place to be stranded. Erik talks a little bit more about that spoke issue that Scott was having, but we talk about a whole lot more as well. Here is my interview about the ride, about the marathon, about how it all started. Here's Erik Douds. Erik, thank you so much for joining me. It's fun to talk to you. I always laugh when I talk to adventurers and distance runners. I don't have a lot in common with you, but it's great to meet you and talk to you. How are you?
Oh, I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me on the show, Stacey.
Before we get into all of these things that you do, let's just back up. You were diagnosed when you were a teenager. Tell us a little bit about what you remember about, finding out you had type 1. Were you very sick?
I went to an all-guys Catholic school, and I remember showing up and everyone was telling me that I looked really skinny. And what's surprising for the audience members, I'm 6 feet now, but I've always been a thin, lanky kind of kid. And so when everyone's like, oh, you're so thin, I'm like, yeah, what else do you want to point out?
Oh.
And it was only showing up to the doctor. I lost about 15 pounds in 2 weeks. And just realizing how sick I was once it all kind of clicked together. And it was that moment where my grandfather actually had type 1 diabetes. And so I knew it was a possibility, but all of a sudden, that possibility became reality. And since then, life has changed.
Yeah, just a little bit, I bet. What was life like for you at that time? Were you already really into sports or active, or was that something that came later?
I went to a highly competitive high school. And so, as an example, our baseball pitcher, Rick Porcello, now plays for the Red Sox. And so showing up to high school, I was 100% the very nerdy kid, someone that enjoyed being active, but kind of went to a school where if you weren't on a professional level, like you weren't considered an athlete.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I always struggled with that in high school. And kind of when I got diagnosed, it really, kind of kicked me down where it just took a while to get back up on the horse.
So you're already feeling nerdy. You're feeling tall and skinny. You're with all these boys who want to be Red Sox pitchers. Was type 1 diabetes mentally difficult for you in high school?
I remember it coming at a time where I thought life was actually going very easy, kind of like you have all these steps and it's like, all right, got elementary school out of the way. I'm in high school, kind of coasting. And I remember being diagnosed and thinking it was kind of a calling. Like, here's a challenge that I can have for the rest of my life and try to accommodate, because I remember sitting in the hospital bed and saying, I either can be bitter about this for the rest of my life or find that silver lining. And I've always been very thankful to be raised around parents who taught me about nutrition since I was a little kid. And so I didn't really change my diet after type 1 diabetes and that diagnosis. And then I think that's what really got me into sports is here's a new challenge, because I kept bringing things up to the doctors and they kind of had no solution for it. And I thought that is what's fun.
Well, but that wasn't that long ago. This is 2007 that you're diagnosed. So doctors at the time were telling you, we don't know anything about sports? What were they saying?
I mean, there's a lot of stuff. What I particularly remember is actually trying to study abroad and saying I want to go away for 9 months. And there weren't that many solutions around it. But I think as you honed into things and saying, I remember training for my first half marathon and thinking that was the world's furthest distance. And this is now going to college. And it's kind of that conversation of like, pull back your basal rates and then keep a close eye on things. But we all know it's so much more complicated and there's so many fine details that we do that it's really hard to have a conversation with an endocrinologist about all these small details where we're like, do I drink Gatorade? Do I drink half Gatorade? Do I drink only water? And that's what you have to figure out. And I'm really happy that the diabetes community has kind of flourished online because you pick up all those little tips.
So back up for a second. Did you wind up studying abroad shortly after your diagnosis?
So, yeah, it'd be, a little bit after my diagnosis, kind of fast forward 4 years, and I studied abroad in Denmark. And what was interesting at the time was, I was trying to figure out how to get supplies for more than 3 months, but then thinking like, I'm going to the land of insulin. Like it's insulin's produced in Denmark. We have Novo Nordisk is based there. Everyone hears about their wonderful healthcare system. And I was the first American patient a lot of these endocrinologists had. And a small little side story is that they actually gave me a free EKG. So they checked my heart when I ended up showing to the doctor because they're like, oh, you have diabetes, you have this heart disease. Like, we should check on the health of this. And I was like, wow, the care here is amazing.
Oh, wow.
But then I decided to extend my stay for another 3 months. And it was the whole question of how do I get supplies abroad? Like my family visited me. And that's where I really grew an interest in traveling with diabetes. And after college, I ended up on the border of Ethiopia and South Sudan. And you can go through your mothering mind of how many questions came around that as well.
Before we move on to Sudan, and oh my goodness, why did you choose Denmark? It wasn't because of Novo Nordisk, right?
So my background's actually in environmental policy.
Okay.
That's what I was doing professionally before I now get to lightheartedly call myself a professional athlete. And so Denmark's a world's leader in environmental issues. And then my name is Erik with a K. I always say I'm a Viking K because I was raised Swedish American. And so I knew that the education was amazing and that my mom had actually never been there and she always wanted to go. So I was like, oh, this will be a great place to study, learn, and then my parents can visit me at some point.
Wow. Okay. So you decided to travel for your environmental causes, for that kind of work. How do you get from Denmark back to the U.S. and then to Sudan?
Believe it or not, what I actually studied in college is a national park on the border of Ethiopia
Oh,
and South Sudan called Gambela National Park. And the comparison's almost like if you're starting out Yellowstone nowadays, how would you actually implement it? And so my background's actually in mapping. And so if you're laying out roads, I was looking at where you would put a road so it doesn't get intersected by floodplains, but then also would bump into things like elephants and lions and things to boost tourism. And so I ended up going out there and conducting a lot of research and surveys, and it was quite the experience.
what's it like to be an American coming to a country where I'm sure there are map makers and there are people who are working with these parks and doing these things, and having to walk that fine line of, well, here's my college degree, but I've never actually seen a lion, right? I mean, how do you, I imagine that, I don't know, I guess, and maybe I'll take this part out. In my head, I'm thinking, well, here's an outsider trying to tell us how to make our park, but we really do want the help. How do you balance that?
What was shocking to me as an American was actually landing in the continent of Africa and realizing how little I knew about this entire continent. And at the time, the Ebola crisis was happening, which mainly happened on the west coast of Africa. And everyone was sending me concerns saying, oh, I know you're in Ethiopia. Are you all right? And I'm like, this is as if something happened in New York and you're in California. You know, I'm so far away. And so it's always a fine line when you're in international development, but at the same time, it's an amazing connection because I was actually working for the government. And so it's this really cool collaboration where they had all this data that my college would then process. And here we actually are able to send our resources, send our knowledge, and work directly with the government to hopefully build out the park with kind of the best practices of the day. And it was really cool because I actually worked with a team of about 15 Ethiopians. So there's a lot of locals who were helping us out as well.
That's really interesting. All right, well, let's shift from that, which we could probably talk about for another hour, to what you're doing now and what you've been doing for the last few years, which is, as you said, you're a professional athlete, long-distance athlete. How does that even occur to someone? I talk to so many people, oh, I'm going to go up Everest, I'm going to run across the country. I mean, you're very nice people, but there's something wrong. Why do you do these things?
I don't know, Stacey.
Although I will say, to flip it around, I have talked to people who say, I could never get behind a microphone. How do you talk? So I guess we're wired a certain way. But did you wake up one morning and say, okay, today's the day I'm going to run 26 miles? Or was it more gradual? Right back to Erik in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. For 7 years, One Touch Vario test strips have delivered reliable results you can trust. And did you know they have the lowest copay on the most health plans and are always covered on traditional Medicare Part B? To upgrade today to the One Touch Vario Flex Meter, visit diabetes-connections.com and click on the One Touch logo. Coverage and payment may be subject to coinsurance, deductible, and patient eligibility requirements. LifeScan does not guarantee coverage or payment. Now, back to Erik answering my question about why.
It all ties in, actually. So I remember coming back from Ethiopia and sitting on the couch in the basement of my parents' home, and my dad coming up to me, and he's kind of picking my brain about the trip. And he goes, Erik, you use diabetes as an excuse to go above and beyond what's expected of any normal person. Mm. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think it's a little bit of truth of proving it to yourself, but then I'm also a firm believer that you need to see it to know that it's possible. And so going to places like Ethiopia and just showing that, yeah, you can live with type 1 diabetes and go out there is something that definitely resonates in my heart. But then going back to high school as well, you know, I've always struggled calling myself an athlete. And my dad's an amazing example of, he just started triathlons at the age of 61. And he has this mentality that, you know, you're kind of an athlete your entire life. Diet is not temporary. It's your entire life. And I think a lot of people need to see that every single person, if you have a body, that you are an athlete. That's one of Nike's sayings. And so when I traditionally thought of the athletic space, I see all these people who are really diligent. They know about their training plans. They get out every single day. And I was like, man, this is not me at all. As a point of reference for anyone listening, like I left to bike across America and my bike was only put together maybe the week before. And I had all my stuff actually together for the first time when I was on the trail. And I think it's a little bit of learning by fire and then slowly saying yes to everything that has gotten me to where I am today.
What's the hardest event so far that you've done? I mean, not that we would look at and say that's difficult, but that you physically felt this might have been a mistake.
I'll say one physically. So I biked across the U.S. to actually join Connected in Motion, which is a Canadian nonprofit that does outdoor education for type 1 diabetics. So I joined their adventure team to hike the North Coast Trail, which is the most northern tip of Vancouver Island. And this is the brainchild of Jen Hansen, who I just got to spend 3 weeks with up in the Yukon. And so I biked across the U.S. and then went on this hiking trip. And it was, to start off the trip, we got dropped off by boats on a rocky coast and then spent about 7 days in the deep wilderness where you see Kodiak bears, which are those white bears that Paul Nicklin shoots. You'll see in National Geographic. It's up in that area. But we were joking at the end of the trip. We have this photo of our feet just like destroyed. And I'm like, Jen, I don't think there's one moment we were actually hiking because it was always like scrambling over trees or going over rocks. And I was like, there's so many photos of me passed out. And I was like, I legitimately just biked across the U.S. and this is the most exhausting trip I've done.
Unbelievable. That's great. So now you are, you're working on a couple of different things. I want to talk New York City Marathon, but let's first talk JDRF Bike Ride, because the way we found each other is, although, in this community, I think we're all just, 1 degree of separation pretty much. But Scott Johnson has been very public in talking about his new training for the JDRF Bike Ride. And you guys are doing this together. Are you doing the Death Valley one?
We are. It's happening October 19th. We are riding 100 miles in Death Valley to raise $8,000.
And neither one of you has done this ride before.
We have not.
Okay. How'd the conversation go? Who said this is a good idea and the other guy said, yeah, sounds great?
I'm not sure if either of us said it's a good idea. Scott Johnson, going back to college, when I was a freshman in college, I remember trying to find any resources about being a student, going through that experience, and to give a point of reference for people like in the online community. Like for a while, I used to write a blog called collegediabetes.com, two kind of obvious words put together. And that was, no one owned that. And
yeah,
it kind of
just to show
shows
you, right?
The void that was there. And I just remember Scott's face popping up and I'm like, here's just a normal looking dude that plays basketball, loves Diet Coke, and it just gave me some reassurance. And his face pops up all the time. And I was like, one day I'd really love to meet this guy. And so Annalisa Vandenberg, who I bike around with, doing the Miles of Portraits, she's also a type 1 diabetic, which is how we know each other. We were doing our trip from Los Angeles out to Santa Fe, and we were passing through town, and Scott just moved to San Diego, escaped the winter. And he's like, oh, I'd love to host an event with you guys, meet up with you. And he just is so caring and so enthusiastic. He put on this event, and slowly he's like, I haven't really been on my bike in a really long time. My bike is still in my garage. I'm not sure the last time I've ever changed the tire on it. And one thing led to another, and all of a sudden, Coach Pat hosted us for a few nights. A lot of times when Annalise and I bike around, a lot of type 1 diabetic families put us up, and he was telling us about the Death Valley Ride. And I was like, that sounds really fun. And slowly I roped Scott into it, and that is how hashtag Scott's Death Ride has come into existence.
He's been fun to follow because pretty much all summer and now into the fall, he's been documenting the training and, sharing stories. How is the training going for both of you? I mean, we're getting pretty close. Are you going to be ready?
Despite all the biking I've done, I've never actually biked 100 miles on a road bike. And so to give people a visual, normally I'm on a touring bike, which is about 80 pounds a gear, but you're kind of slowly going throughout the day. You're stopping for breakfast, you're stopping for lunch, you're getting your ice cream, drinking that third cup of coffee. And so to wake up at 6 a.m. on this skinny little road bike and go out to a place that's going to be in October, but the heat is still expecting to be in the 90s.
Yeah.
And ride for 6+ hours. I'm like, it's going to be, I was telling Scott, I was like, highest of highs and lowest of lows. It's definitely going to be a journey, but it's been amazing. I'm here in Tucson right now, and PK Steffen's a JDRF coach. And so I have to say that all the coach networks, they really keep you on track. And I've been hitting the trails here, which is really beautiful because Tucson has a huge bike loop around the town. So we've been encouraging each other, make sure we're hopping on and off the bikes. He just keeps breaking spokes on his bikes, which is unfortunate.
I don't know anything about what that means. Is he kicking it?
Oh, I don't know what's going on, but he's like, man, the bike shop's had been repairing it for a week, and I need to get on this. So I think we're in good shape, but it'll be a good journey to follow.
I hear really amazing things about the JDRF bike rides. Obviously you have to train, and for Death Valley in particular, you have to be in great shape and be prepared, but they're safe. They have the vans following you around. They make sure everybody does well. And it's more about the effort and the intent than the accomplishment, although most people obviously finish and do quite well. What's that JDRF bike community been like for you so far? Because I hear it's pretty amazing.
If people have never done a race or a community, I really encourage them to do it. I think this gets back to the heart of being a quote unquote athlete. A lot of people are afraid to ever enter a race saying like, well, I won't finish in some sort of set time. And what's really magical about showing up to a race or event, especially when it's rooted in an invisible disease like type 1 diabetes, is that you find yourself just surrounded by this community that's so supportive. People who know what it's like to ride on a bike and balance highs and lows, but, have that coach, have that support network. And you realize, yes, it's about the ride, but it's almost so much more about like the people that you're talking to while you're out there, but then also hanging around the pool and just hearing other people's stories. And that's what's magical. It's just the community coming together and experiencing something like that. You get to share your war stories, but you also get to share your celebrations. And it's really magical, and it's how I, have built out so many friendships that I never thought I would have.
Okay, so what's wonderful, so now you're part of this great community. You have this wonderful event coming up. You and Scott are going to cross the finish line, God willing, and all is well. And then you're going to turn around. Scott's going to take a well-deserved rest, but you're going to run the New York City Marathon. How's that going?
It's been a challenge.
Wow. Have you run the New York City Marathon before?
I ran the Copenhagen Marathon with one of my high school friends. It's all going back to high school, but one of my friends, he lost 60 pounds by himself and then sent me a message saying, hey, Eric, I want to train for a 5K. And lo and behold, fast forward, him and I were crossing the Copenhagen Marathon.
Wow. And
it was a true story of seeing someone going from mile 0 all the way up to 26.2 miles. And it's just that reminder that so much of this is just taking it step by step and slowly building up. And I really think about James's story. I'm like, I know you can start from the beginning and reach kind of these goals. And that's why I enjoy setting them. And that's why I enjoy roping in other people.
So who are you running the marathon with?
So Beyond Type 1 has a team of 30 Type 1 diabetics. We have a goal of raising $50,000, I believe, as a team. So all the athletes have a goal of $3,000. And it's just been amazing. I showed up last year just to cheer people on. I happened to be in town, and I was with actually a Type 1 diabetic creator who's based in Toronto, Raquel Alongi. We made a huge juice box wall to actually raise awareness around what lows are and to start a dialogue. And we're like, oh, there's all these cool people here. And I just kind of got inspired by like seeing Mary Lucas out there and seeing all these runners, seeing Marie Diaz. Like I was cheering her on, and I was like, people have called the New York City Marathon like the people's race because so many, Boston has all these qualifications around it, and New York City is kind of this giant party. And I was like, that would be so cool to experience as someone that has had New York as the horizon their entire childhood. I lived in New York, and I figured, I'm like, oh, I'm not biking anymore, so now I have all this free time, and that's how I got roped into that.
Wait. So you got roped into that. I'm not biking anymore, but then in the middle of the marathon training, you are biking.
Yeah, it kind of happened in the same week. I was actually sitting in PK's backyard when I signed up for the Death Valley Ride, and I know New York City Marathon was like right around the corner. It's just, you have those moments, and I got ambitious.
Wow. You mentioned right at the beginning of this, when we were talking about your doctors when you were diagnosed, about how there really is no exact science, how it's so individual. Do I drink the Gatorade? Do I drink the half the Gatorade? But can you speak a little bit to some advice after all of your experience, maybe just in general terms, but if there is someone listening who's thinking, okay, I want to take that first step, like your friend, maybe I'll run a 5K or maybe I'll start with 1 mile, but they're very nervous because, diabetes makes this tough. How do you start? What advice might you give?
Small steps, and that every step matters. I'll be actually riding this weekend with my friend Jean Medley, who I met at a Tour de Cure, and she's someone else that lost, I think maybe 150 pounds at this point.
Wow.
And Annalise and I are working on editing the Miles of Portraits Southwest trip, and I have this small moment of her standing on what seems to be a flat block right around her home. And she shares this moment of her stopping multiple times to bike up it because there's such a small incline. And now her and I are planning her 100-mile bike ride.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it's just get out there.
What about, though, in particularly to diabetes? I mean, I would say, I don't want to feed you lines here. I would say things like, keep track. Don't be afraid to fail. I mean, I'll give you the example. My son is wrestling right now. This is a brand new sport for us. I've talked about it on the show a little bit this year. And we are, from the outside world, not doing well. He does really great at the weightlifting days. We've got that. He goes a little high. We leave it alone. He comes right back down. But it's the days where he has either a double workout, weights then mats, or just mats. It's so fast. It's so furious. It's so new that we're having highs, we're having lows, and it looks terrible, but we're learning every single time, and it is getting better. So, I'm talking to the endocrinologist. We're adjusting basals. We're adjusting food. We're adjusting recovery. But it's just a question of keeping track and knowing his body. He's gaining muscle. He's losing weight. He's 14, so he's a mess anyway. But I wonder if that kind of what looks like a mistake keeps people from trying. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, you have to treat everything as an experiment. And I think also when you push your limits, you have to expect kind of a little bit of a greater risk. And I think for diabetes management specifically, I kind of talk about, have your plan A, but have your plan B and have your plan C. And what's really amazing is that if you can travel or know other type 1 diabetics, is that they can help fill in that plan B or plan C for you. But going out there and you might have gone out 9 times, but then on that 10th time, your blood sugar goes plummeting down, so you have to have that goo or that gel ready for you. I think that's where it is personal experiment. There's no guidebook on how to bike across the U.S. managing type 1 diabetes. And I'd say that there's still learning lessons every single day. But it's definitely being prepared. And then I've also switched over to managing my blood sugar with Loop, and some automation has greatly, greatly changed a lot of the finer details that used to keep me up at night.
Oh, okay. So let's talk about that. You are looping. We've discussed that many a time here on the show. I think most listeners are familiar with basically a hybrid closed loop situation. Talk to us a little bit about how it does help with exercise. Is it beyond just I'm sleeping much better through the night?
Yeah, it's way beyond that. I'm trying to think of where to begin. So, going to the night, an issue that I was raising up kind of constantly while I was biking is how do you eat 4,000 calories while managing type 1 diabetes? To give people a visualization, it's like try to eat 2 tubs of ice cream throughout the day and manage your blood sugar. And it's so tough because you don't know when your body's recovering, when it's not. And Annalise and I were having wild swings. We'd shoot up to 300 one night. We'd drop down to 50 the other night. And it was really difficult. And, to take a step back, I think without automation, you have to really think about what can I be doing in my lifestyle to help prevent some of these situations. I love Adam Brown's Bright Spots and Landmines. How do you avoid the landmines? How do you build yourself up for success? But then Loop and now the ability to build out profiles where once I'm biking, it automatically cuts 50% of everything. And then it's in the back of my jersey where it can be giving me insulin, but kind of pulling things back and pushing things up. And I really, really find it useful in that post-recovery where your blood sugar can skyrocket, but it can also plummet. And it's just smooth things out. And it's amazing.
Oh, that is fantastic to hear. I'm excited. We're waiting for the tandem, the commercial closed loop that hopefully is coming. So I'm excited about that. I think it'll help a lot. But it'll still be ups and downs. Even with all of that, there's still going to be difficult times. I don't want to put you on the spot, or I don't know if you endorse anybody. I'm not asking for a commercial. But are there any products that you use that you like a lot? Gels or stuff that, like you said, you stick in your jersey. Any tips on that end?
In terms of actual snacks, I follow kind of a flawed vegetarian diet is what I'm always joking about. And so I'm always just throwing like dates and bananas and stuff like that into my into my jersey pocket itself.
What did you call it? What vegetarian?
A flawed vegetarian.
Oh, flawed vegetarian. So not perfect.
Not perfect. No one's perfect out there.
Got it. I thought it was something I hadn't heard before. I'm like, the flan vegetarian. That sounds delicious.
Yeah, desserts only.
But you're trying to eat real foods and keep things with you that are pretty much real sugars.
Yeah, but I'll say, Nate Checkett, who's the CEO of Roan, who's a men's athletic company, I have been living in their shorts because he has designed athletic shorts that it's hard to describe how many pockets there are, but he's like, I can't be the only person that wants to fit my pump in my pocket and then something on the outside of that. And it doesn't even have to include diabetes, but I'm like, it's so nice having a gel in a pocket, and then outside that is an orange if I need to eat it. And I'm like, they're so comfortable, and I've been living in them because it's so nice as a diabetic male. Like, we don't often travel with a purse. A lot of us, I know Rob, how he rocks, kind of the fanny pack, but it's like we have so many things and going out on a run that I absolutely love his shorts. But I think for diabetes management, when I was up in the Yukon filming the Connected Emotion trip this year, so I spent 3 weeks doing the trip twice, we got to wear the Libre. And so I'm normally on Dexcom. And so I think a continuous glucose monitor is amazing, but I really enjoyed the Libre because I think there's a lot of people out there who are still hesitant to wear a continuous glucose monitor. They just don't want that much information. They want super low profile. And I was just happy to experience the Libre and be like, this thing is super easy to tack on. It's very affordable, and it at least gives you the trends. And I think that's the biggest tipping point when I was a teenager and was able to see my blood sugars. I was like, oh, when I eat this, I actually can see my blood sugar rise or come down. And I just remember before that, like, when you're just finger pricking every 5 hours, you don't really understand how your food correlates with your blood sugar. And so I think that's been a huge benefit to our community is, the Dexcom system. You have the Libre now coming out as a really great option. And you obviously have Medtronic and all that. And I think that's one of the biggest innovations. And now automation is kind of the next step forward.
Wow. Before I let you go, Erik, is there a challenge that you have in the back of your mind that you'd like to do someday? You've done so much already. Are there one or two things that you're like, oh, someday that's on the list?
Annalise and I are working on biking around the world. And so depending on when this is released, we actually have officially booked our flights out to India to go biking there for 3 weeks.
Wow. Okay, wait. Biking around the world. What are the rules for that? Do you bike on the boats? I assume or do you fly and not count that? Or is there a stationary bike involved for transit?
We'll see if there's ever. So in the biking community, you have the circumnavigation, and that usually includes a flight. I definitely do daydream about doing 100%, human powered trip. I think for now, Annalise and I, so we have the Miles of Portraits series, which we've done Miles of Portraits Alaska and then Miles of Portraits Southwest. We did the Trans Am together, and the next stop will be Miles of Portraits India. And I think her and I will put together trips that over a culmination of time will include hopefully every continent around the world.
I wasn't sure when I asked that question if you'd have an answer at the ready. But my goodness, you don't like to sit still.
There's a lot of hours on a bike, so there's plenty of time to think.
Love it. Well, all the best to you in all of your adventures. So you've got the Death Valley, New York City Marathon, and then the world. So thanks for stopping here first and spending some time with us, Erik. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much, Stacey. It's been an honor.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
More information about Erik, about all the rides, about the marathon, everything at diabetes-connections.com or in the show notes for every episode. If you're listening on a podcast app, all of them have a way to get to the notes. It can be a little tricky. It's under details or more here, or sometimes you swipe up. You can always go to the homepage and find out more. Tell Me Something Good this week is all about scholarships and about blogs. Is anybody still writing blogs? Well, I found out the answer is definitely yes. Tell Me Something Good brought to you by Real Good Foods. It's low carb, high in protein, delicious, convenient in the grocery store freezer, or you can order online, but they're great people. The CEO got a letter a while back from a 9-year-old with type 1, and it was all about how happy he was to have their pizza, a pizza that he could eat with his friends, that his parents didn't really worry about in terms of dosing. Real Good Foods isn't a diabetes company per se, but that letter made them realize they wanted to do more in our community. So it was really great to have them on board this year on the podcast. And I love that we found their food because Benny loves it. It's so convenient. We're fine with regular pizza, but he loves the Real Good Foods Supreme Pizza. I like the Italian line they've come up with, the breakfast sandwiches. Find out more. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Real Good Foods logo. I'm going to be a little selfish this week and focus Tell Me Something Good on the good stuff that's happening in the Diabetes Connections Facebook group. If you're not in there, please feel free to jump in. If you're not on Facebook, what I'm going to talk about here, much of it will be linked up in the show notes or on the homepage, because I know not everybody's on Facebook. I get it. But I got a private message from Laura recently, and she asked me if I knew about a comprehensive list of college scholarships for people with type 1. And I didn't know of that. Certainly my daughter, who is in college this year, that wasn't something we looked at for her. She doesn't have type 1. But of course, Benny is a freshman in high school. So we're going to start looking at that. And I encouraged Laura to post in the group because I knew other people would know. And lo and behold, about 2 seconds later, a bunch of people chimed in. The College Diabetes Network has a whole list on their site. They talked about the Night Scout Foundation. There was a really interesting look at vocational rehabilitation for tuition. This was from someone posted a long time ago, but they did get a scholarship. So I thought that was really fascinating. And then Diabetes Scholars, which is now part of Beyond Type 1, has a list as well. So I was really thrilled that she was able to post and find the information she needs. And now we have like kind of a database there that you can go and consult with. But I'll link up all of that in the show notes in case you're not on Facebook. And then the other thing that happened is I was at the Friends for Life Falls Church Conference not too long ago. And I met, again, I've met her before, Molly, who writes the Hugging the Cactus blog, which I think is just a brilliant name for her relationship with diabetes. And I went back, I hadn't read her blog in a while, so it spurred me to read it, and I posted it in the Facebook group. And when I posted it, I said, are there fewer bloggers? Because it just seems like people that I read, let's be honest, 12 years ago, it'll be 13 years ago in December, the people that I started reading aren't blogging so much anymore. So I asked, what's up with the blogs? Who's doing it? And a bunch of people, I sound like a very old person, what's up with the blogs? But I posted it. And a bunch of people chimed in that they're writing and here's their stuff. And I said, post it in the group because come on now, it's not about self-promotion so much. It's about, learning from each other and reading each other's stuff. So we had a great outpouring of blogs. I'll link up a few in the show notes. But I would encourage you, again, if you're in the Facebook group, go ahead, seek that out. You might find some posts that really speak to you, some bloggers that are writing, what you need to hear or read. I was thrilled to find some new ones. We'll keep doing that. There's some old favorites that have been around a long time and are still going and still so valuable. If you've been thinking about starting a blog and maybe you thought, well, everybody else is stopping, so why get in? Please do it. Even if you only write once. Even if you write once and then 6 months later, you write again. I'm telling you, your voice matters. What you have to say will speak to someone. It will help. You may never know it. Maybe it just helps you. When I started blogging in the beginning, honestly, I thought I was going to help somebody else. It helped me more than anyone just to get those thoughts out there. I would really encourage you to do that. And if you've got to tell me something good, a diaversary, a milestone, anything good in our community, you can shoot me an email, stacy@diabetes-connections.com, or I usually post and ask for these submissions. Pretty easy to find. I'll be doing that again this week. So please tell me something good. Lots of good stuff happening in the next couple of months as I roll out the world's worst diabetes mom. I'm going to be at an Asheville, North Carolina event this week, a Meet the Author event that JDRF is putting together Thursday, October 17th. I'll be in the Charlotte area, which is really easy because I live there, on November 2nd for Take Control of Your Diabetes, which is just a fabulous conference. Macy's Believers going down to Stuart, Florida in November, and then another Meet the Author event in the Charlotte, North Carolina community, November 16th. I'm talking to JDRF chapters across the country about 2020, so I'll be putting some more events on the calendar. I'm really excited to be going to some new places next year. If you'd like me to come speak at your event about the world's worst diabetes mom or to do a podcast interview live, we've taped panels before, which I really want to do more of because not everybody can get to these conferences, right? And then we can share with you. Please reach out to your JDRF chapter or your other diabetes organization. Certainly there's so many across the country. And let them know about me and let me know about them, and we will see what we can do. Thank you, as always, to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions, who is doing a yeoman's job as I gave him the guest interview at one point. And as I said, I'm sitting here in my hotel room with my pillows doing this. Thank you, John, for working your magic and being incredibly patient with everything. I adore you. I don't know how I would do this without you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for listening. Just a real quick note here. I'll probably mention this in another episode. One of the things I'm doing here at She Podcasts is I'm on a panel about community. And I wasn't sure about it because the diabetes community is a community. But is Diabetes Connections, the podcast, a community? I've really been heartened to see that it is. I did ask about that in the Facebook group and got some incredible responses. So I'm still noodling on that. I'm still marinating in the goodness of it because I got kind of emotional to look at the responses. It's just been brilliant. I don't know how to really react to it yet because it's so fresh. It's like an hour old, these responses. So I'm going to think about it more, talk more about it. And thank you so much. It means the world to me. So thank you again. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here next week. Quick disclosure, at times I may mention Tandem Diabetes Care. However, I am not compensated by Tandem for my actions, and Tandem does not support or control this content. I have created the content, and it is based on my personal experiences and observations.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.